Back in the 1980s, tractors weren't just machines, they were lifelines for farmers battling tough fields and an even tougher economy. But hidden beneath the fame of John Deere and Case IH were some absolute diesel beasts. Tractors so powerful, so innovative, they changed farming forever. Yet today, almost nobody remembers them. From Alice Chalmers' secret prototypes to a versatile so massive it could outpull anything on the planet, these are the 10 forgotten diesel tractors of the 80s you need to see to believe. Stick around, because number 7 will blow your mind. Number 1. International Harvester 3588 2+2. When International Harvester introduced the 3588 in 1979, it didn't just add another tractor to its lineup, it launched a whole new concept in tractor design. Known as the 2+2, this series was International's bold attempt to rethink how a four-wheel drive tractor could work in row crop farming. Instead of building a massive, rigid, articulated tractor like the big Steigers or Versatiles, IH engineers placed the cab at the rear half of the machine, mounted the engine in front of the articulation joint, and powered both axles. This unusual forward-engine rear cab setup gave the 2+2 tractors their unique silhouette, earning them nicknames like Snoopy. The 3588 was rated at about 150 PTO horsepower, powered by IH's proven DT466 turbocharged 6-cylinder diesel. The transmission was a 16-speed partial power shift, giving operators plenty of flexibility in fieldwork. But the magic of the 3588 was not just horsepower, it was maneuverability. Thanks to its articulated chassis, the tractor could make a surprisingly tight 15.8-foot turn radius, a huge advantage in row crop farming where agility mattered. At the same time, because all four wheels were driven, it had the traction and pulling power of a conventional 4WD tractor. Farmers found that the 3588 could handle large implements in wet conditions, yet still straddle rows for cultivating and planting. It was effectively two tractors in one, a heavy-duty tillage machine and a nimble row crop tractor. Sales were strong initially, with nearly 3,000 units sold across the 2+2 lineup in just the first year. The 3588 in particular struck a sweet spot for Midwestern farmers looking for more power without sacrificing precision. So, why is the 3588 largely forgotten? Timing. International Harvester's financial struggles in the early 1980s, combined with labor strikes and declining 4WD demand, crippled the company. By 1985, IH merged with Case, and the new Case IH management abandoned the 2+2 concept in favor of the more conventional Magnum tractors. Despite its innovations from draft-sensing hydraulics to an enclosed engine design, the 3588 disappeared after just a few years. Today it's remembered mostly by collectors and nostalgic farmers, a glimpse of what might have been had IH stayed solvent. Number 2. International Harvester 3788 2+2. Building on the success of the 3588, International Harvester introduced the 3788 in 1980 as the big brother of the original 2+2 series. If the 3588 was revolutionary, the 3788 was evolutionary, taking the same forward engine articulated design but giving farmers more raw power. Rated at around 170 PTO horsepower, the 3788 used the same 7.6L DT466 turbocharged diesel but tuned for higher output. It paired with a 12-speed power shift transmission, making it easier for operators to handle changing conditions in the field. The 3788 preserved all the key advantages of the 2+2 concept. Its high clearance allowed it to work effectively in tall row crops, and the articulation joint meant tighter turns than any other tractor of comparable horsepower. Farmers appreciated its ability to transition from planting to tillage without swapping machines. Its balanced weight distribution also improved traction in wet soils, reducing compaction and making it effective for spring planting. For many farmers, the 3788 symbolized the hope of modern farming in the early 80s, a machine that promised to save time and boost efficiency. IH marketed it as the solution for farms that were growing larger and more complex, needing a tractor that could multitask. In practice, it delivered on many of those promises, but like its sibling, the 3788 faced challenges beyond engineering. By 1981, the farm economy had soured. High interest rates and falling crop prices left farmers cautious about buying expensive new equipment. At the same time, IH itself was hemorrhaging money, burdened by labor strikes and outdated factories. Production of the 3788 ended quickly, and while it sold respectably, it couldn't match the sheer numbers of Deere's 40 series tractors or the traction of Steiger-built 4WDs. The 3788 has since slipped into obscurity because its lifespan was short, and the Case IH merger that followed buried the 2+2 legacy. Unlike the later Magnum tractors, which enjoyed decades of production, the 2+2s were discontinued quietly. Still, enthusiasts look back at the 3788 as one of the most daring designs of its era, a tractor that could have redefined farming if corporate fate had been kinder. Number 3. Case 4994 Field Boss. When Case rolled out the 4994 in the early 1980s, it was gunning for bragging rights. At 400 gross horsepower, powered by a massive turbocharged V8 diesel, the 4994 was the most powerful tractor the company had ever built. In an age when farmers were pushing bigger plows, heavier chisels, and wider air seeders, the 4994 represented raw muscle. It wasn't designed for finesse, it was built to dominate heavy tillage. What made the 4994 unusual was its configuration. Instead of featuring an enclosed cab, which by the 1980s had become standard, the 4994 had an open platform with a rollover protection structure RF eaves and a simple bench seat. This harked back to the open station designs of earlier decades, but on a tractor pushing 400 horsepower, it felt anachronistic. Still, for some farmers, especially those in dry climates, the open-air approach wasn't a deal-breaker. It also kept costs slightly lower compared to enclosed models. Under the hood, the 4994's V8 was a monster, delivering torque in spades. The tractor used a partial power-shift transmission that gave it multiple working ranges, allowing it to keep pulling power consistent under load. In the field, it was a beast. Farmers reported that it could handle implements that would bring smaller 4WDs to their knees, making it a natural choice for the largest grain farms of the Great Plains. But despite its muscle, the 4994 was destined to be short-lived. The tractor was launched just as Case merged with International Harvester in 1984 to form Case IH. In the restructuring that followed, management chose to focus on the new Magnum line and phase out models like the 4994. Only a small number were ever produced, making it something of a rarity today. The 4994 is largely forgotten because it represented the end of an era. By the late 1980s, enclosed cabs were no longer optional. They were expected. Farmers also wanted versatility, tractors that could handle both heavy tillage and row crop work. The 4994's open-station brute force design didn't fit the new vision of farming. Still, for those who owned one, it was unforgettable, a last gasp of V8 power before tractors evolved into more refined machines. Number 4. Allis-Chalmers 8095. The Allis-Chalmers 8095 remains one of the most intriguing what-if stories of 1980s tractor history. Introduced only as a prototype in 1986, the 8095 was designed to push Allis-Chalmers into the over 200 horsepower segment at a time when Deere, Case, and International Harvester were already fighting for dominance in that space. Allis had always been strong in the mid-range tractor market, but it lacked a true competitor to the big row crop machines coming out of its rivals' factories. The 8095 was supposed to change that. At its heart, the 8095 carried a massive 11.0-liter Komatsu 6-cylinder diesel engine, a departure from Allis's usual power plants. This engine was capable of producing between 215 and 240 PTO horsepower, putting it right in the mix with Deere's 4640 and IH's 3788. The tractor was designed with front-wheel assist (FWA), essentially a powered front axle paired with a conventional rear drive, giving it extra pulling power without resorting to full articulated 4WD. In many ways, it was ahead of its time, anticipating the rise of high-horsepower MFWD tractors that would dominate the 1990s. The 8095 also featured Allis's control center cab, which was spacious, insulated, and loaded with features for operator comfort. Farmers who tested the prototypes reported that it was one of the quietest and most ergonomic tractors they had ever sat in. The 20-speed power shift transmission gave the machine versatility in the field, while the heavy-duty hydraulics meant it could handle larger implements than any Alice tractor before it. Unfortunately, timing once again doomed innovation. By the mid-1980s, Allis-Chalmers was in serious financial trouble. The farm crisis of the decade had cut deep into tractor sales, and Alice was struggling to keep up with larger competitors. In 1985, Alice sold its agricultural division to Deutz Fahr, forming Deutz Alice. The new owners weren't interested in pushing the 89.5 into production, preferring to streamline the lineup and cut costs. As a result, the 89.5 never moved beyond its 4 prototypes. Today, the 89.5 is barely known outside of collector circles and agricultural historians. It is a reminder of how close Allis-Chalmers came to competing in the high-horsepower segment, and how corporate turmoil robbed farmers of what might have been a truly competitive machine. If it had gone into production, the 89.5 might have cemented Allis-Chalmers' place in the 200-plus HP category and changed the trajectory of the brand. Instead, it became a forgotten footnote, a ghost of what might have been. Number 5. White 2180 Field Boss. White Farm Equipment's 2180 Field Boss, introduced in 1982, was the company's answer to the horsepower race of the early 1980s. White had been struggling to establish a distinct identity after inheriting the Oliver and Minneapolis Moline legacies, and the Field Boss series was its attempt to consolidate its lineup under a modern, unified brand. The 2180 stood at the top of the row crop tractor offerings, delivering around 180 PTO horsepower thanks to a powerful Caterpillar V8 diesel engine. The 2180 was built as an articulated 4WD machine, giving it excellent traction and flotation in the field. Its articulation system allowed for surprisingly agile turns, which was valuable when pulling large tillage tools or planters. The Cat V8 under the hood gave the tractor a unique character compared to competitors' inline 6-cylinder diesels. It was smooth, torquey, and capable of handling demanding fieldwork with ease. Coupled with White's 18-speed transmission, it provided plenty of flexibility for operators to match power with the job at hand. Farmers who bought the 280 appreciated its pulling power and rugged construction. It was particularly effective in heavy tillage operations, where its weight and torque allowed it to work in conditions that would bog down smaller tractors. For large acreage grain farms in the Midwest, it was a valuable addition to the fleet. However, the timing of the 280's release couldn't have been worse. By the early 1980s, the farm economy was collapsing, and demand for new high-horsepower tractors dried up. White, already in financial difficulty, couldn't market the 280 aggressively enough to compete with Deere's 40 Series or Case IH's emerging Magnum line. Production numbers were relatively small, and many farmers never even saw a 280 on their dealer's lot. By the late 1980s, White was swallowed into Deutz Alice, and later AGSO, and the Field Boss line was retired. The 280 quickly faded into obscurity, remembered only by a handful of loyal White customers. Today, it's a rare find, mostly spotted at auctions or tractor shows. For those who owned one, it was a dependable workhorse. For most farmers, though, the 280 is little more than a forgotten chapter in White's long, complicated history. Number 6. John Deere 8630. John Deere's 8630, introduced in the mid-1980s, represented a bold step into the world of row-crop four-wheel drive tractors. Deere had already established itself as the king of the 2WD and MFWD row crop segment, but the 8630 was its attempt to compete with articulated machines from Steiger, Versatile, and IH. Rated at around 275 horsepower and powered by Deere's massive 10.1 Lil 6-cylinder diesel, the 8630 was a formidable machine built for big farms that needed to cover serious acres. The 8630 stood out for its combination of brute power and operator comfort. Deere's SoundGuard cab was one of the best on the market at the time, offering farmers a quiet, climate-controlled environment for long hours in the field. The 16-speed transmission gave it the flexibility to handle a wide range of jobs from primary tillage to heavy planting. Farmers appreciated its stability, articulation, and raw pulling power. Yet the 8630 was more than just a big tractor. It was Deere's attempt to bridge the gap between conventional row crop machines and articulated 4WDs. Unlike some competitors' massive tractors, the 8630 was still designed with row crop clearance in mind. This allowed it to pull large implements while also working in fields where precision and maneuverability mattered. Despite its innovations, the 8630 never reached the iconic status of Deere's 40 or 50 series row crop tractors. Part of the problem was timing. It debuted during the farm crisis, when few farmers were buying expensive new equipment. Another issue was that Deere soon shifted focus toward its 9000 series articulated tractors and later its tracked quad-track style machines, which rendered the 8630 a transitional design. As a result, production numbers were relatively low, and the 8630 slipped into obscurity. Unlike the beloved 4440 or the powerful 4850, the 8630 doesn't have a strong collector following today. Still, for those who ran them, the 8630 was a solid performer, a sign of Deere experimenting with new designs before settling on the path that would lead to its modern high-horsepower lineup. Number 7. Versatile 1150, 1983. If there was one tractor in the 1980s that symbolized raw power, it was the Versatile 1150. Released in 1983, this Canadian-built monster was rated at an eye-popping 470 horsepower, making it the most powerful production tractor in the world at the time. Built for the wide-open expanses of the Canadian prairies and American Great Plains, the 1150 was designed to pull the heaviest equipment farmers could throw at it, and then some. The 1150's heart was a Cummins 18.8-liter six-cylinder diesel engine. With its massive displacement and robust design, this engine delivered torque figures that dwarfed anything else on the market. Coupled with a heavy-duty 12-speed transmission and articulation for maneuverability, the 1150 could pull 50-foot cultivators, giant air seeders, and other massive implements with ease. Fully ballasted, it weighed over 30 tons, giving it unmatched traction and stability in the field. For farmers with thousands of acres to cover, the 1150 was a dream come true. It allowed them to farm faster, pulling wider equipment and completing jobs in fewer passes. This meant lower fuel costs per acre and fewer labor hours, a critical advantage during a time when efficiency was the key to survival. The 1150 also cemented Versatile's reputation as the brand for farmers who wanted simple, rugged, no-nonsense power. But like many tractors of its time, the 1150's reign was short. The farm crisis made it difficult for farmers to justify such a massive purchase, and only a limited number were sold. In 1987, Ford New Holland purchased Versatile and shifted focus to a more conventional lineup. The 1150, while groundbreaking, became a casualty of corporate reshuffling and economic downturns. Today, the Versatile 1150 is a rarity, remembered fondly by enthusiasts but virtually unknown to modern farmers. It proved that ultra-high horsepower tractors could be practical, paving the way for modern 500-plus HP machines. In many ways, the 1150 was a tractor ahead of its time, too big for the market of the 1980s, but a preview of where agriculture was heading. Number 8. Allis-Chalmers 8070. The Allis-Chalmers 8070 was one of the last hurrahs for a once proud tractor manufacturer. Introduced in 1982, the 8070 was designed to give farmers a high-horsepower row-crop tractor with modern features and comfort. Rated at around 170 PTO horsepower and powered by a 7.0L six-cylinder diesel, it was strong enough to compete with Deere's 4640 and IH's 1586. What set the 8070 apart was its focus on operator comfort and technology. Allis introduced the Acoustic Cab, an advanced cab design that significantly reduced noise levels, making it one of the quietest tractors on the market. Farmers who spent long days in the field immediately noticed the difference, and the cab quickly became one of the tractor's most praised features. Inside, the controls were ergonomic and logically arranged, giving the 8070 a modern feel compared to some of its competitors. The tractor also boasted strong hydraulics, with a 3-point hitch capable of lifting over 8,000 pounds. This allowed it to handle larger implements than many of its rivals, making it a versatile machine for everything from planting to tillage. The 20-speed power-shift transmission provided smooth operation and adaptability across field conditions. Despite its strengths, the 8070 was a victim of timing. By the mid-1980s, Allis-Chalmers was on the verge of collapse. The farm crisis gutted sales, and the company simply couldn't keep up with giants like Deere and the newly formed Case IH. In 1985, Alice sold its farm equipment division to Deutz, and the 8070 was rebranded as a Deutz Alice before being phased out entirely. Because it was produced for only a few years and under a struggling brand, the 8070 never achieved the iconic status of Deere's 40 series. Today, it's a relatively obscure model, remembered mainly by collectors, yet it deserves recognition for being one of the quietest, most advanced tractors of its day, proof that Alice Chalmers was still capable of innovation, even in its twilight years. Number 9. Case IH 3294. The Case IH 3294 was introduced in 1986, right at the cusp of a major transition for the company. Essentially an updated version of the earlier Case 3294. This tractor was one of the last conventional row crop models before the Magnum series changed everything. Rated at about 19.7 horsepower and powered by an 8.3 L turbocharged 6-cylinder diesel, the 3294 was a solid mid to high horsepower machine aimed at large-scale row crop farmers. One of its standout features was the Silent Guardian cab, which was designed for comfort and noise reduction. Farmers praised the cab for being quiet and well laid out, making long days in the field less taxing. The transmission was a triple-range multi-shift power shift system, offering 36 forward speeds and 3 reverse. This gave operators an impressive range of choices for matching speed to conditions, a big advantage over simpler gear drive competitors. The 3294 also featured strong hydraulics, making it capable of handling heavy planters, drills, and tillage tools. For farmers who needed a reliable 200 horsepower tractor, it checked all the boxes: power, comfort, and versatility. However, the 3294 was quickly overshadowed. In 1987, Case IH introduced the Magnum series, which combined the best of Case and IH engineering into a new line that would go on to become legendary. Compared to the Magnums, the 3294 looked like an interim step, solid but unremarkable. Production numbers were limited, and within a few years, the tractor was retired. Today, the 3294 is rarely mentioned, often overlooked in favor of the Magnums that followed. Yet it deserves credit for bridging the gap between old and new. For farmers who owned one, it was a dependable workhorse that carried them through a tough economic era. For historians, it represents the end of an old design philosophy and the beginning of a new one that would define Case IH for decades. Number 10. Deutz Fahr DX 830. In the early 1980s, German manufacturer Deutz Fahr shocked farmers with the introduction of the DX 830, one of the first European tractors to push into the 250-plus horsepower category. At a time when most European farms were still running machines under 150 horsepower, the DX 830's massive 6-cylinder, 11.4-liter Deutz turbo diesel churned out 280 horsepower, making it one of the most powerful tractors of its decade. The DX 830 was ahead of its time not only in power, but also in comfort. It featured a spacious cab with sound insulation, full climate control, and ergonomic controls, putting operator comfort at the forefront. Its full-time four-wheel drive system gave it incredible pulling power, while Deutz's air-cooled engine technology made it unique compared to water-cooled rivals. Despite its innovations, the DX 830 struggled to find a wide audience. The early 1980s farm crisis meant few farmers could afford such a large, expensive tractor, and outside Europe, dealer networks were limited, production numbers were low, and within just a few years, the model faded into obscurity. Today, the DX 830 is a rare sight, remembered by collectors as one of the boldest tractors Deutz Fahr ever built. It was a glimpse into the high horsepower future, but in the 1980s, it was simply too much, too soon. So there you have it, 10 diesel tractors from the 1980s that revolutionized farming but slipped through the cracks of history. Which of these forgotten giants do you think deserves a comeback in today's fields? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories. And if you enjoyed this trip down farming history, smash that like button, subscribe for more vintage tractor deep dives, and share this with a fellow tractor fan. Until next time, keep those engines running strong.